Very good afternoon. We start with a major development in the Salisbury spy poisoning case. The boss of the government's Porton Down lab has told Sky News that scientists have not been able to prove that Russia made the nerve agent used in the attack. Gary Aitkenhead, the chief executive of the Defence Science and Technology Lab, told Sky News while they have proved a weapons-grade nerve agent was used, they haven't been able to work out where the Novichok came from.
We, in terms of our role, were able to identify it as Novichok, to identify that it was a military-grade nerve agent. We have not verified the precise source, but we provided the scientific information to the government, who have then used a number of other sources to piece together the conclusions that they've come to.
But you have not been able to establish at Porton Down that this was made in Russia?
As I said, it's our job to provide, the scientific evidence that identifies what the particular nerve agent is. We identified that it was from this family and that it's a military-grade nerve agent, but it's not our job to then say where that actually was manufactured.
Is it possible to establish where these things are manufactured?
It can be established through a number of different input sources which the government has access to. From our perspective, scientific evidence is only one of those sources, and it requires a number of other things in order to verify that.
So to be clear, you're not able at Porton Down to say where it is from?
At this stage, with the work that we've done thus far, we've been able to establish that it's Novichok or from that family. We are continuing to work to help to provide additional information that might help us get closer to, the question that you asked, but we haven't yet been able to do that.
Well, Russia has denied being behind the poisoning of the Skripals and has pointed the finger at Britain. And Russia has requested a meeting of the chemical weapons watchdog tomorrow to discuss allegations previously made by Britain. In a moment, we'll speak to our correspondent Lisa Holland in Moscow to find out how this news might go down with her, and absolutely in Moscow. But first, let's go to our crime correspondent Martin Brunt, who's standing by in Salisbury. Hello to you, Martin. So the investigation is continuing. Latest that we're hearing is we can't prove at this stage that it was Russia.
No, but Gary Aitkenhead in that interview was also adamant that it hadn't come from Porton Down. Those suggestions, of course, have been made, but he wouldn't say whether at Porton Down Novichok had been developed or whether it had been stockpiled there or stocks of it were kept there, but absolutely adamant that it hadn't come from within the walls of Porton Down, which is, only 8 miles away from here. To be honest, Kay, I think the people of Salisbury don't care one way or another whether eventually it is proved that this had come from Russia. Again, in that interview, Mr. Aitkenhead said that only a state laboratory could produce it, but I imagine most people here, it's not their greatest concern. There are still people here, and I've spoken to one in the past hour, who is still concerned about what they describe as late and confusing messages about their continuing risk. They've heard messages from the government and elsewhere that the risk is non-existent. They've also heard that the risk is low, and there are still cordons around the town. I mean, you can see here, there's still a cordon around a good part of the centre of the shopping area where the bench was, where Mr. Skripal and his daughter were found collapsed more than a month ago. This site is one of 9 that's been handed back by the counter-terror police to the local police and the local council, and it's for them, with DEFRA, the government organisation, government department, to finally lift these cordons. They haven't done it yet. I'm told it might be some days, maybe some weeks before people can walk around these areas again, even though counter-terror police have finished their decontamination and their forensic examination, and that still raises questions in the minds of the public who are walking here. Look, there they go. within feet of these sites, still rather puzzled why they're allowed here and why only a few days ago they were still watching forensic policemen in full boiler suits and gas masks picking up evidence.
Okay, well, let's bring in Lisa Holland, who's standing by in Moscow, as I said. Hello to you, Lisa. Whatever the situation in Salisbury at the moment, the situation in Moscow means that presumably the president will be delighted at the latest he's heard from Porton Down.
Yes, absolutely. It will be music to people's ears here that Porton Down itself, which of course Russia has at one stage accused of potentially being involved in the poisoning, but Porton Down itself is saying that as things stand at the moment, there's no evidence to say that this poisoning had come from Russia. Now, that's obviously going to play in well to a narrative that the Russians are portraying at the moment. Increasingly, the chorus from them is, where is the evidence? And to that end, tomorrow they are calling for an extraordinary session of the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is now going to be meeting in The Hague, an emergency session, a session behind closed doors to discuss a list of 13 questions that the Russians have demanded answers to from the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Essentially, they want to know what is the data that's been given to the watchdog from the UK, what access has the watchdog had, what kind of help has the OPCW given, and what did the watchdog do in the UK. Now, remember that the Russians from day one have said that they, if they are being accused, should have access to the investigation. And as things stand, they've had no access to either the investigation or indeed any of the evidence or indeed any of the samples. And on that point, Kay, one of the scientists who was allegedly involved in the Novichok program back in the 80s and 90s, had himself said in an interview that if there are samples from the victim who was poisoned, then you should be able to tell from those samples where the poison has come from. So it all creates a fairly kind of murky picture as to lining up the pieces and crossing the T's and dotting the I's for people to be able to substantively say that this was a nerve agent which came from Russia.
Okay. Thank you both for now. Of course, as soon as we hear from President Putin, we'll update you further. But for now, thank you, Lisa, and also thank you, Martin, in Salisbury.
We will make America great again.